Welcome to Assumptions, the podcast where two friends, one an atheist, that's me, Kyle, and one a Christian,
That's me, I'm Daniel.
sit down and listen to each other's worldview. Today, we need to start off with a little bit of an explanation or clarification. Of sorts.
Yeah, so we just to put some context, we are on what episode number are we on?
Six of season two.
Of season 2. So we're just over halfway through, and we recorded most of the season way back in January, and now it is May, and so we've kind of taken a break from recording, some time putting the episodes out, and one of the episodes we did recently was on sexuality in the church. It was called Christians Are Bigots, rather provocatively titled. And going back over that episode, I've had some people that have really liked it, some people that have been rather bothered by it, and re-listening to some of that content, I've just realized there's some things that came across that were misinterpreted or that came across wrong that I just want to go back and clarify over.
So this was kind of I don't want to say shock, that might be too strong of a word, but
Right.
It kind of surprised me, Danny, when you approached me with this, that there was a little bit of pushback from the community that you were talking with. So maybe you can explain a little bit about what you said,
Sure.
the interpretations that caused, and then what you actually meant.
Yeah, let's do that. And it was a tough episode to record. I think it was. Listening back to that recording, I just realized how nervous I was because here we are, a podcast that's on Alberta Podcast Network, sponsored by ATB, and we're talking about controversial subject points, and it's. I was just nervous and going into it, and it's bothering for me to go back and hear things that came across awkward or just that weren't. I actually transcribed the whole last 15 minutes of that conversation, and I was kind of embarrassed because I love communicating. Communicating is one of my favorite things, whether it's from other people that are really clear at communicating or when it's myself that's communicating clearly. So to go back and realize that there are things just that were said wrong or were confusing is really embarrassing for me, and I feel bad for our listeners because we ask you to listen to our voices for hours at a time, and we want that quality to be good.
Yeah, welcome to our 3-hour podcast called Assumptions.
Well, there's a lot of, if you've been listening to this for a while, then you've invested a lot into this show, and so we wanted to give you the best.
Absolutely. So let's start with what you actually said.
Yeah, so we were talking about sexuality in the church and how the church culture, evangelical culture, perceives that. And one of the things that I think came across wrong was I was often confusing my own church and its stance with the broader conservative evangelical stance towards LGBTQ. And one of the ways that came across specifically was in just saying that, like my church, for example, really does have a lot of clarity, conviction, and integrity on these issues. And one of the things I really appreciate is that I said on the show that I'm frustrated by how in the church, as a culture, there's a lot of sexual misconduct that takes place. And so kind of clean up your own house before attacking others. And one of the things that my church really treats highly is sexual sin. They just don't tolerate it in any form, whether it's pornography or whether it's, sexual sin within the church or outside. And so that's something that is, I just want to be clear that they are very clear on.
Right. And I visited your church. I was there in season 1. We recorded a bit of an episode from there. What's your church called?
It's called Calvary Grace. Yeah, here in Calgary. Yeah. And so I guess one of the couple of things I want to clarify is that there is a difference between a church that has a lot of clarity on these issues. And I appreciate that. I think it's something that we should be clear about, that it does matter whether it's a stance on LGBTQ and homosexual, the nature of that, or whether it's on sexual ethics within the church, within straight relationships. I think we need clarity on that.
I think rather than anything, I see so many times in today's society where people are either morally inconsistent or like theologically inconsistent, where they only seem to want to talk about certain things when it super benefits them, and they don't take that sometimes harder stance where it's like, no, this isn't right in any situation. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it benefits me or not. Yeah, so that's nice to hear.
That they do have that. And I think the other thing too is, if I do have frustrations with my church, that's a conversation for my church. It shouldn't be something that I go on a podcast and talk about. Like the church is my family, and so I think some people in the church interpreted that you're dissing our church, even though I didn't mention the church by name. And it could easily come across that way, and I'm frustrated by the society, the evangelical culture, perhaps more than I am with my church specifically.
Got it.
So I wanted to clarify that, and I do appreciate their clarity on it. They're very clear. Their conviction, it's something that they believe in, and for good reasons. And then their integrity, that they apply it to all these situations. But some of the things that I think that that came across wrong, that or could be interpreted wrong, that I said. One of the things I said, I wish I could celebrate gay culture. I said it was hard to have convictions that don't fit the society. And I guess how that could be interpreted is that I affirm gay culture and that I affirm people living in that kind of relationship. And that's not what I meant. I kind of, in the sense that I love culture and I've loved the companies that I've worked with over the time. I love being part of them. And there are times where they affirm things I don't agree with. And it would be much easier if I could just go along with it and celebrate. That's easier to do. And in the same way that I think like Wesley Hill, who we interviewed recently and whose works I refer to a lot, he is someone who has desires for homosexual relationships, and he wishes he could affirm that. But he knows that it's greater. There's a greater good in not doing it. It's a harder for him, but he is repaid as a Christian and by God in ways that are much more satisfying overall than he thinks just living by that culture. So that's kind of what I meant by that statement. Does that make sense? Is
that makes sense?
Okay,
absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Now, I think it's important for you to go through what you need to go through here. And for me not to jump in necessarily with pushback and criticism,
Sure.
So I'm going to sit back and let you continue.
Yeah, it's just more of I want to hear, make sure that I'm clear than anything else.
For sure.
And so the other thing that I said that I definitely came across wrong is, and I think you even noticed this, Kyle, but you asked are there people in my church that I know of that are gay or LGBTQ on the spectrum, and I said, no, but I wish that there were. And you're like, what does that mean?
Right.
And what I had meant by that is not that there are church members, people who claim to be Christians that are in leadership or that are part of the church family that are living in what the Bible would call sin, and of any kind, whether that's sin of living in homosexual relationships or sleeping around. Like that's just something that I think the church needs clarity on, and I'm glad my church does have that. What I meant is, I wish there were people coming through our doors, people that were coming that were drawn to the gospel and that were drawn to Christ, that were struggling with these things.
Right.
And I will say, too, that even in my church family, I know of people that have struggled with these desires for homosexual relationships and have been discipled and loved by the church and worked through that in ways that I think were healthy and good. So that's that. Yeah, I don't think that Christians should be practicing homosexual behavior. But I do want people to be drawn to the church of all kinds, people that are lusting, people that are sleeping around, people that are sleeping together, people that have homosexual relationships, and then drawn to Christ and repent of sin and be brought to him.
That makes sense.
Okay, cool. And then the other thing I mentioned that I just is a little harder to kind of go through, but I said I was fine with gay marriage in culture. And I meant by that it's not my battleground. I feel like maybe it's a generational thing, but for me, it's like that battle's done and over. I'm okay with there being like a society that is okay with that. But I do think that I don't necessarily think that kind of relationship is healthy. Just I think sleeping around, any kind of sexual sin, that's what the Bible calls sin, I don't think is good. Whether it's lust or whether it's, and what I think I would get pushback from that from conservative Christians on these stances that, well, isn't it, if it's not supported, like straight relationships, straight marriage is supported by God, and so are you saying like, is this different? Is this, and how does that? And just for me, I agree with those arguments in a way, but it's just not my battleground. I'm just like it's okay. I'd rather focus on other things.
Focus on other things. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so I guess like turning from just my specific church to the broader society of evangelical society that pushes back against or wants traditional moral values in society. I think the things that I'm just kind of like sorting through and trying to think through is I don't think there's enough acknowledgement of the hurt and confusion behind the identity struggles, which is why I wanted to hear your story on episode 3 and just know, and for a lot of people, I think this applies especially for trans people, like there's just a lot of pain and a lot of frustration and a lot of hurt that goes through that. And I think that needs to be acknowledged and that needs to be wrestled through by Christians who are frustrated with those ethics.
There was a podcast I was listening to recently, and I think it was actually the podcast called Conversations with People Who Hate Me. And it was this girl who was getting hate comments left on her public profiles.
Yeah.
But it was actually herself that was leaving those hurtful messages to herself, which I didn't even know was a thing. Because there's so much hurt, she talked about this story about her finally coming to terms with, she was doing kind of a self-harm thing in the digital space, but she was still self-harming herself, and going and finally seeing a counselor who was just there and saying, hey, I'm here to listen, and I'm here to validate that you're hurting right now,
Right.
and it's okay that you're hurting right now. And that was the kind of the switch that flipped for her to be able to go and seek better guidance and better counseling, because she had never received that before. It was either people saying, A, she deserved the hate comments, which is awful, but also B, just people immediately going to like trying to solve the problem for her, and never like once to say, no, you're okay that you're hurting right now.
Right.
And let's just sit in that for a bit.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's just deal with that grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the example of Jesus is something that is worth thinking about, because he worked with prostitutes. A lot of his inner circle friends were former prostitutes. So I use the word former because he there's times where, well, there's this famous story in the Bible where Jesus he's brought by the Pharisees, the religious leaders at the time, a woman who's caught in adultery, a woman who's sinning sexually. And they're going to stone her to death, which is what the Old Testament law had for that. And they basically ask him, like, what do we do? They're kind of wanting to confront him, and he writes down something in the dust, and then he says, whoever sins has not sinned, cast the first stone. And one by one, all these leaders walk away. They don't stone her. But then Jesus turns to the woman and says, I don't condemn you anymore. Don't sin anymore. So he confronts her. He's like, don't do this again. This is wrong. But he also listens and has huge sympathy and just real care for people. And I think that's where we need to confront sin, but we just need to listen, and we need to care, and we need to respond with love as Christ did to that. So yeah, that's just one thing I want to say. But then,
that's our subtitle: assumptions. Be more like Jesus.
Always a good idea.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, anything else that you needed to point
Yeah,
out?
a couple more things. So I think that one of the things that just frustrates me about is that there's an overemphasis, I think, on the sin of homosexuality, rather than the human heart, which is sinful, and it applies to so many other things. I just feel, I think that we need to be clear on what the Bible calls sin, but that is just so much more fundamental than just these specific acts. So that's one of the things that I would say. And then I think there's also a certain tendency, I think this comes across by especially a lot of conservative writers on these things, of wishing for the olden days. Oh man, back when everybody just was straight, and marriage was just that was how it should be.
People knew their place.
Well, yeah, you just see this in a lot of contexts, and I think that what that doesn't acknowledge is just how even Christian societies back in the day had so much. Not to say that those people that were committing those acts were Christians, a lot were.
Daniel, all I want is the good old days where I could have a plantation, own a bunch of people, and women didn't say anything.
Exactly.
Come on.
Yeah. So just not acknowledging that it's a human heart issue, and that even sexual sins existed throughout human society.
That's right.
Not just now. And then
1989, actually.
Yeah, that's when it flipped.
That's when it flipped. Yeah.
But then also just treating the world and culture as the enemy, rather than the sin that lurks within everybody, even if that culture is a Christian culture or my own culture or myself. So just those are kind of the things that I am frustrated by. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I enjoy and I value your commitment to clarity.
Thank you.
So after the music break that's going to happen right now, we're going to talk about some commitment in marriage.
I fall down to my knees. Eyes are raised.
Okay, so Daniel, you recently-ish just returned back from going to Portland again. You would think you would pick another place to go
City
to,
for once.
says the guy who's going down to LA for the 9th year in a row. Tell me a little bit about what you were doing in Portland.
Yeah.
And all these salacious details about who you met.
That's right. Well, so we recorded an episode on dating.
Yeah, right before
before I left
That's right.
for Portland. And then I've been twice since then. But I was, as listeners who've listened to that dating episode know, I was talking about my relationship, but because I had never actually met Annie, We had been dating online for several months, and hadn't actually met in person. I was kind of a little bit coy, I have to say, in my comments.
Sure.
A little more, just not quite sure where it was going to go entirely yet. And now that our relationship, I was in Portland visiting my girlfriend for the second time, and I know that it's a path we're going down. So I feel like I can talk a little bit more about relationships and dating than I did even on that last episode. And I've been thinking more about it. So there's some things that on that last episode that I want to kind of talk a little more about and with more specifics.
All right. You say you've been thinking about relationships a little bit more deeply, about marriage a little bit more deeply.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I remember years ago thinking about reading a book by Tim Keller. I've referred to Tim Keller a lot. He's one of my favorite authors and speakers on Christianity. And I was reading this book, and it was just a little side comment in the book. And he had this comment where he said, what if you look at our culture, whether it's the Christian culture or the greater culture, guys tend to seek relationships based on beauty, and girls tend to seek relationships based on financial security. That's just, is that?
I mean, I think that's what the culture normally thinks.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
By and large.
By and large. Yeah. And so he said, the problem is that Christians kind of do the same thing. And he said, what would it look like if we were to value in relationships and seek in relationships personality and seek Christ and want a relationship where what isn't important is these physical things, whether it's money or security or physical looks that are going to fade, but we're looking for something deeper than that.
I think that's been the debate for like decades now at this point. I mean, it's been exacerbated a little bit with like Tinder and all the other dating apps out there. That everyone says the same thing. I want personality. I want to. Except unless you're being like super honest, like I am vapid and I'm only going after looks. But for the most part, people are like, I want someone I can grow old with, or I want to have like someone who makes me laugh every day. Like they're looking at personality traits.
Sure.
But it's still structured, and I would even say offline, just as much as online. We are initially looking at people around us and be like, oh, that person over there is attractive.
Yeah. Yeah. In his book on marriage, Tim Keller has this story, like an idea. He says, imagine you walk into a Roma party and you look around them and you see, okay, those people I don't like the look of. They just aren't my style. They just don't have the quite body shape I'm looking for. Okay, those are three people I think are the most handsome and beautiful. Cool, I'm going to go up to them, get to know them a little bit. Maybe one of them I have a chance of like returning that, and then maybe I can form a friendship out of that. And he says, what you should be looking for in a relationship is you should find the person you can be best friends with, and then go from there and start on that end of things.
I mean, I'm usually looking for the Doritos. So
in the party,
the first thing at a party, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, so that's what you've been thinking about.
Yeah.
Why has that been top of mind?
Well, because I read Tim Keller's. So I read that first analogy that I shared. I read years ago, and it was kind of this moment, like, oh, okay, I should be thinking along these lines. And and then I read Tim Keller's book on marriage, where he talks about that friendship, prioritizing friendship, and that's kind of how my relationship with Annie unfolded. Is it was based on friendship first, and then outside of that came the rest of it. Right. And so that was something that Annie and I met through a mutual friend that introduced us via Facebook and Instagram. And my first thought was, I'm never gonna have a crush on this person. And then my second thought was, she posts really cool stuff. Mm-hmm. And a year went by with us just being friends online. And then we started talking and started to develop a really good friendship that was just a real sense of mutual understanding and a real sense of mutual alignment. And what was interesting about that is, and going back to Tim Keller's book on marriage, which I'd read just before I actually had started talking to Annie, is he talks about the secret thread in someone's interests. Mm-hmm. So he says, what is that thread that ties together your favorite books, your favorite, the things that just speak deepest to you? And you should have someone who has a similar thread, just because you'll have something in common that will be united for a while. But he also says that it's not just this friendship, it's also a deep spiritual friendship and a deep alignment on what it is to follow Christ and what it is to grow in him and what it is to encourage each other in that. And that's what developed first for Annie and I. And then out of that came, we could have something going on here. And it wasn't based on the physical, even though she's beautiful, but it started with the friendship and this deep understanding and deep commonality that then turned into the physical.
So I realize this is kind of your I shouldn't put words in your mouth, but this is basically your first relationship.
It's the
or
first, serious one. Like I've been interested in other girls or tried
Yeah.
to date other girls or had crushes on other girls. But this is the one that's actually going someplace.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because this is kind of your first real relationship, I guess I'm curious from the Christian perspective then
Yeah.
now, how do you balance, upholding Christ's values with
Mhm.
kind of like basic human instincts, or not instincts, but basic human desires?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
how are you juggling that
What do you mean by
currently?
that?
Well, I mean, obviously there is the way that the Christian worldview looks at relationships and building towards a marriage and a
Right.
commitment to one another.
Yeah.
I also know, being a guy,
Yeah.
that there are basic urges, if that's how we want to
Sure.
term them, that sometimes I have to override, be like, you know what,
Yeah.
let's settle down here
Yeah.
right now. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious about.
Well, the Bible is clear that sex is for marriage. It's
Mhm.
a way to unify the bodies to represent what's happening on a much deeper level. And so that's just off the table. That's something that we're just but there's a lot of gray area in between. And so how do you maneuver that? And one of the
Okay.
things that's nice is that it's predominantly long distance at this point.
Right.
So
okay.
we have to engage intellectually and get to know each other and spend a lot of time talking about our days and about each other and our beliefs and our backgrounds and so that's but we call it vocal cuddling where we just talk over the phone about how much we love each other and so that like there's ways you can go down that path
Right.
where it's like this is maybe not healthy and so for us it's been I think there's a combination of care and an enjoyment that's both there. Care because we want to be careful and we know that we can go too far and regret it. And I think there's times where that does happen. But there's an enjoyment because we know that it's not up to us to fulfill these standards. And that's where we get our peace from. Our peace comes from knowing that Christ loves us and we're forgiven and he's greater than our own morality and how well we behave.
Just for my own knowledge base here, I know that in the Catholic Church, at least, there's
Yeah.
this idea of confession, right?
Right.
If you sin, you can go and you can confess to your priest, and they can absolve you of those sins.
Yeah.
Does that same sort of thing happen in the I can never say this word properly, evangelical church,
Well
or is
done.
that not really a thing?
I think the thing that the difference between this is a side trail, but it's a good question. I think the difference from an evangelical understanding is that confession is important. We need to confess our sins, what we have done wrong, and ask for forgiveness. But we don't need the priest to do that for us. We don't need that mediator, someone who comes between us and Christ, because Christ is the Bible in the Hebrews says Christ is our high priest. He is the one who has taken our sin upon himself. And so he stands before God, the judge, and says, Daniel's forgiven. And so that's why confession, we would confess directly to God rather than having to go through a priest to do that for us. But there is mutual accountability that's important. And so for Annie and I, it's been something that as we've been wrestling through this, we go, okay, we want to have clear standards, so we're not going to kiss at this point in our relationship. We just decided on that. And there's certain things physically we're just not going to do. But there's a lot of enjoyment that still can exist. And what we've realized is it's not necessarily the hard rules. Like we can feel that we've crossed the line and be doing the exact same thing physically,
Right.
and so it's much more of just listening to our conscience and being accountable to each other and talking about it and being accountable to others, but primarily being accountable to God and saying, where are we? And we've just talked a lot about it and have wrestled through it and I think for us it's been something there's an enjoyment. Like, yeah, we love each other and we are humans that are embodied in bodies, and that's good. But there's also a sense of if we go too far sometimes, we realize that if we take a step back, that's okay. Like if we're going to get married, we're going to be doing everything. And so it's almost better to take it easy and enjoy. And I think what we also find is that our enjoyment comes primarily from the person. Like when we get to know the person well and spend time around the person doing ordinary things, that's the best.
That's the best part.
Yeah. And so not to say that we don't enjoy cuddling and the physical enjoyment within those limits that I laid out. But if we spend too much time doing that, it almost feels wrong because we're not enjoying the person and who that person is. So the ordinary time around each other is the best.
I have a question then.
Yeah.
What is the part of the relationship that has surprised you the most?
Hmm.
And what is the part that has affirmed your suspicions the most?
Oh, interesting. I think for us, because it's been long distance, there's been the closer that we get and the more we know about each other, the more affirmation there is. So I'll give you an example where I'm someone who loves people, but is an introvert. And that's something that Annie has noticed in me. And she says, yeah, Daniel, I love the fact that you are someone who values people and you want to spend a lot of time with people. And they're really important to your life that you want. But you also recognize the need to be alone and to have quiet time. And just to have someone that recognizes that combination has been really delightful and just really affirming. Another way that that's been interesting is because we're long distance. So she knows the more contemplative, the more thoughtful side of me. That's how we kind of met, is talking that way. When she was actually around me and saw the goofier side of me, which you're aware of, Kyle.
Sure. Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure how that would go down. And she loves it and knows that balance. So that's been quite affirming. So I guess the surprise has come from being around each other physically and being around each other in, say, social environments, where you're used to just the two of you talking. And so when you're in a social environment, it's a little bit different. And just learning to rework your understanding of the person. Because when you're doing long distance, you see each other every couple of months for a good chunk of time. But then it's easy just to go off that conception of the person and to kind of wrap that up in your head rather than a day-to-day awareness of the person that comes from that. So that's been, but it's been really affirming. And the other thing I think that's been, I talk about how we're so aligned on things and how wonderful that is. But ultimately, I think that's good and that's important, but that's going to change. People change. And so the thing that has encouraged me the most in a relationship is realizing for me that how much Annie's life is built around Christ and is built around her living as someone who follows Christ and living as someone who his identity is based in Christ. And that's been deeply affirming for me. It's been helpful as we're working through just challenges of our days as we go about the rough bits of the day, because I can encourage her in that, and I know that it's strong in her. And that's where that mutual sense of encouragement that comes from that, the mutual sense of bringing each other closer to Christ. I think that's when I think of wanting to keep going down this path of having a life with her. That's what gives me the most sense of confidence. Because if that's true, then even as we change and as our lives change, that's, to me, is most important. I want someone who can do that and who I can help in that and who can help me in that. And that's the case.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about this, Daniel. I think that any type of relationship that's new always starts off with kind of the flowery bits of the relationship, and it's the weeks, months, and years afterwards where you start to build that life together, which is sometimes the more exciting part of that journey.
I know, and that's where I think back to our first months of getting to know each other and talking daily. Those were really exciting. They were kind of this breathless joy that went on with it. But the life now is almost more ordinary, but it's more deeply satisfying because I know the person and she knows me.
Right.
And I think it's easy in our culture, even for me, like that, the early getting to know where everything's new and everything's exciting. That's wonderful, but that's not where the true joy comes from. It comes from knowing the person.
I think I mentioned this in our dating episode where I am the opposite of what a lot of people are. In that I don't like the first 2-3 weeks of a relationship because it's just I have to talk about the same stories and we are just getting to know each other. I want to fast forward to that part where we're watching Netflix together and it's like this is just the ordinary thing that we do here and now. I'm not trying to impress necessarily. I'm just being able to exist. With you. Yeah,
and it was nice for Annie and I because we were able to have most of those initial conversations over a friendship, just texting each other on Instagram. Right. And so it was just, we got to avoid that, which was nice. But the other thing I just will say is that the deeper you go, it becomes harder in a way because you're learning more about the person's limitations and your own limitations and your own selfishness. And so it's not, there's a real work that takes place. But it's a much more steadiness. There's more steadiness to it.
Hi everyone, Yep, this is Kyle breaking into the conversation again. As always, Assumptions is brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. If you haven't gone to the Alberta Podcast Network's website, there are so many great shows to listen to. Shows like High Level Showdown, The Young Gaffers, Future Chat, Hockey Feels, or a great podcast called Assumptions. No, I'm not that narcissistic. How about Walkcast? It's finally summer here in Alberta. You can go out and get a walk, and this is a podcast hosted by journalist and urbanist Tim Querengesser. Walkcast talks walkability in cities by walking it. Check out all the great shows by going to albertapodcastnetwork.com. Secondly, we are helped by the ATB. Are you starting or building a business? ATB's Entrepreneur Center is a great place to go. Of course, they can help you with your banking, but they also offer workshops and networking opportunities. They can also help get you set up with a mentor. You can find the individual entrepreneur centers in both Edmonton and Calgary by going to the ATB website. Lastly, if you have a smartphone, you should download the free CKUA app. That's a radio station here in Alberta, but all the shows that are on the Alberta Podcast Network can be listened to through that app, Assumptions included. Whether you use Android or iOS, you can easily listen to all of the shows on the CKUA app. Thanks everyone for listening. We're here in the home stretch of the season. Daniel and I are really excited about it, but for now, let's get back to the conversation. What is, then, the Christian view of marriage? I feel like I know this somewhat innately. What is the purpose of marriage in the Christian worldview?
Sure. Yeah, okay. Well, and the Christian worldview on it is interesting. We talked on an earlier episode about the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament and how things change with the New Testament.
There's more spinning rims on the New Testament. So.
Yeah, there's more balls in the air.
Yeah, juggling.
That's right. Yeah. But it's interesting because the New Testament confirms a lot of what the Old Testament teaches about marriage, while also reshaping it and realigning it. Maybe realigning is a better word than balls in the air. Juggling.
This is, again, my heathenistic worldview because I don't know so much about it. I understand that there's the New and Old Testament. What is the actual difference? Who wrote primarily the Old Testament and who wrote primarily the New Testament?
The Old Testament was written before Jesus. The New Testament was written after.
Okay, that's really just the basic difference.
Yeah.
But who are the authors? Is there guesses on who was writing the old stuff before Jesus came along?
Oh yeah,
because Paul wrote most of the New Testament.
Paul and the apostles wrote most of the New Testament. Yeah, and the Old Testament written by prophets or scribes, people that there's a lot of
That's right.
Yeah.
Stephen King. Very prolific. Wrote the Old Testament as well. Have you seen how much torture happens in that and how much scary things happen? Come on.
Demons
and everything.
That's right. So in the beginning, in creation, God,
in the beginning, there was light.
There was light.
Yeah.
We're going to go back to Genesis first one. But God ordains marriage.
Yeah.
So God creates man, human. Adam means human. And says it's not good for him to be alone. So he creates Eve, which means life, and is the word for that, and sets them together and says, be fruitful and multiply, so go create children. So that marriage is a God-ordained thing. Now, what's interesting about that is the New Testament authors, even Jesus, quote that a lot and say it's not like this is something that is good. Throughout the Old Testament, marriage is the way in which God's blessing is shown by being fruitful and multiplying. So that's God's mandate to humans at the beginning, go be fruitful and multiply. And then in the Israel, as the nation of Israel came about and God was speaking through that nation, there was a lot of the sense that if you have children and if you have marriage, that is the way to be fruitful and multiply. And it's the way to extend your understanding of God, the Hebrew understanding of God, to the world. It's by creating more kids. And that's a sign of God's blessing. In the New Testament, that gets reconfigured because it's not just physical offspring, it's spiritual offspring.
Got it. Okay.
So it's the sense that if you look at Jesus, he wasn't married, and he was the perfect human. He was the embodiment of what it is to be a perfect human. He didn't sin. And so how does that work? This is a new kind of configuration. We'll talk more about this when we talk about singleness, because I think that's important. But I guess the point is that the New Testament authors talk about marriage a fair bit, Paul and the Gospels, but they do it with a great understanding. They say marriage, in a sense, is an imitation. It's a picture of how God interacts with humans. It's a picture of Christ and the church, and so there's a greater spiritual reality going on behind these physical, ordinary acts of marriage. And then when we get to our understanding of heaven and the life that exists beyond this life, there is no marriage, because marriage is a temporary thing that illustrates something that's going on much greater. What I'm trying to say is that marriage is important in the Bible, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's a picture of the gospel, but it's not the end goal. And creating life through marriage
is it the end goal here on earth, though?
Not well, yes and no, I guess. No, I would say the answer is no. It's not the end goal here on earth. It's a temporary thing that is beautiful and to be cherished and really important, but it exists to serve God.
Yeah, from my understanding, tell me if I'm totally corrupting your words here. It seems like it's much more important, the idea of going forth and multiplying the spirituality or the gospel itself. Like that is what the multiplying
that's right.
concept is, and marriage helps out with that because you bring offspring, and hopefully they also
well,
grow
it's
up
not
to be
just
in the church and stuff
the
like
sense
that.
of offspring. I think that's true, but what happens if there's a couple that doesn't have kids or can have kids?
Well, that's what I mean. It's like marriage can help fulfill there being more Christians brought into the world, but really it's still the idea of going out and spreading the word of Christ.
Yeah, and so the latter half, the sense of the word of that the spiritual family is more important than the physical family.
Right.
So when you're talking about marriage there to create more Christians, I don't even think that's necessarily the case. I think there should be, families should raise kids in a way that honors God, but it's not this biological thing necessarily anymore. More that marriage is a beautiful picture of how Christ and interacts with us, and so there's something special about it. And so if I were to get married, it's something that I can affirm because I know there's hope, and I know that it's going to help me serve God better, and it's going to help the two of us know God better in a very special way that is harder to do outside of marriage. But it can that spiritual life that's created can exist outside of marriage.
Right. I think there's always this difference between the theoretical and the actual practical application of it, because right now it feels very like, I don't know, technical, like we value this more than that. But I don't think in practice, marriage is still looked at as something that is important, where you want to honor that other partner that's inside the marriage itself. Meaning, like, if from an outsider, what you just said could sound kind of cold, where it's like, this is just a waiting period until the time we get to go to heaven. We don't really care about each other. We are just combining together to try and force other people to come into the church itself.
And that's not what I meant by you're right. There's something beautiful about marriage, and I guess one of the things that I'm realizing, I talked earlier about how the thing that I value most about my relationship with Annie is the way that we're able to help each other know Christ better. Mm-hmm. And marriage is a way that can happen in just very concrete and in very specific ways. And that's wonderful. It's hard work because it requires a lot of really working with yourself and where you are selfish and need help, because it is much more intimate in context for that. But that's a glorious thing. And when I think back to my parents' marriage, and we can talk more about that later, but because of their marriage, they were able to serve God and grow as Christians in a way that was quite unique. But that doesn't have to just happen within marriage.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me tell you why you're wrong.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell you about my kind of views on relationships and why I still think marriage is important in this secular society.
So I guess that's one of the things that coming into the show, I'm curious because you're someone who looks at sexuality in a much more gray way than I do.
Yeah,
less
sure.
Black and white. And so why then is marriage
Well, I think we're going to be somewhat aligned again in one area.
That we're friends.
Right. I think we're aligned in the purpose of marriage with the individual. It just I don't have any layering of God or Christ or gospel in that relationship that I'm pursuing or that I'm going to be inside of. So that kind of gets taken out of the equation.
It's
So
all about the flesh.
it's all about the flesh. That's right. Listen to my new hit song. It's all about the flesh. That's going to be released next week. No, it's. I think yes, that's obviously part of it. There is that attraction,
Uh-huh.
and we've discussed before in the past in other episodes how, while it might not suit me as the individual, I still don't look down on people who do pursue relationships based solely on physical gains or physical retribution.
You don't judge them.
I don't judge
Okay.
them. If that's how they want to spend their life, good on them. It doesn't affect me in the slightest. Why I still think marriage in itself is important is that I do have this sentimental side of me that likes the idea of being able to say to another person,
Hmm.
whether it's man or woman, that I love you so much that I am standing up in front of a bunch of people to say that I love you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with
Mm.
you. I'm going to honor you.
Sure.
I'm going to support you. And we get to be this team that gets to go through life together now.
Yeah.
So if I'm having a hard time, you can support me. If you're having a hard time, I can support you. And we can share the burden that is life that is
Sure.
sometimes hard in and of itself.
How's that different doing that in a commitment kind of context? That's what you're saying. Is you're saying
Yeah.
you're doing it in a public way. There's accountability. All your best friends and family are here
Sure,
to
yeah.
know that you're promising to love this person and to commit
Daniel's
to this
arms are
person.
folded in the back, but
Back row.
That's right.
Just
That's right.
judging.
That's right.
But yeah, so why? Like, how does that change things from your perspective? That this commitment.
You know what? I think it is that declaration. While
Mm.
you're in the dating phase, obviously I'm getting to know you. I'm still committed to you. I still want to support you as much as I can. But that marriage portion, there's obviously the legal side of things
Right.
that helps out. But it's that literal declaration is like, okay, I am now making this official
Yeah.
that I am with you,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to be with anyone else. That we are together, and we are going to go through this. We're going to possibly raise a family together, even if it's just a bunch of dogs. But we're going to be able to go through life hand in hand,
Uh-huh.
however long we may live
Yeah.
together in
Yeah.
this way. So I like that idea of marriage, and I
Yeah.
think absolutely I have my own parents as a reference point. And then there's obviously movies and TV that have influenced me a lot. I
My
mean,
other parents.
my other parents, TV, where I think, I look back at some of my favorite TV shows that I was growing up. It was always this man and woman in a relationship who
Uh-huh.
might have, for dramatic effect, had disagreements here and there, but always by the end of the episode were able to resolve and reconcile those feelings and be able to move on together. And then everyone forgot about that in the next episode. It was great. But that recurrent idea is like, oh, these people, they
Uh-huh.
can still disagree.
Uh-huh.
They're still here to support each other, and they're still going through life together. They've made this commitment to one
Yeah.
another, and
Yeah.
I always wanted that. Like
Right.
that was
Yeah.
always an ideal in my mind that I
Yeah.
wanted to have.
Yeah, it's beautiful in a way.
It's
like,
it's very it's
yeah.
very beautiful. That
Yeah.
sitcom, or well, it
I
was
didn't mean
mostly
they were
sitcoms
beautiful. I
growing
meant the
up.
idea of like,
That idea was great.
yeah.
For my own parents, there were some hard times, definitely, but I think you and I are in this interesting position where both of our parents are still married after many, many years.
Yeah.
How many years have your parents been married now?
I always forget. It's over 25.
Over
It's like
25. My
26,
parents just
27.
celebrated their 40th wedding
Wow.
anniversary.
Yeah.
So married a long time.
Yeah.
There was points in my teenagehood I was like, I think they should break up because there was some money troubles and stuff going on at the time. But they got through it, and they're still committed to one another.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a celebration that should happen
Sure.
because
Totally.
of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
These-
That's huge.
My mother was a teenager when she got married. My dad was in his early 20s, and they've survived
Yeah.
40 plus years together now,
Yeah.
which is nothing to sneeze at
No.
in this case. So I think that idea of like, this is the example that I'm seeing, and this is what I have been kind of conditioned through society and through popular culture, that this is what my end goal is supposed to be, that marriage has always been very important. I've always wanted to be married. I've always wanted to have kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those are where it goes. I don't know, how have your parents influenced you?
Oh, very much. I mean, yeah, they've been. I've talked about this before, I think, on the family episode, where I never saw my parents fight. I
Right,
saw them
right.
have
Okay.
disagreements, but never fight. And it's almost a little terrifying because their marriage was so good that anything less than that would be a failure kind of thing.
Right, right.
And I guess that's where, yeah, so their marriage was the thing that I think defines their marriage to this day is a selflessness. Both of my dad and my mom constantly choose the other. They choose the other person's interests over their own. And they both do that. And so it's not that my mom is being pressured by my dad but because my dad's choosing her interests all the time. And it's not, and so there's just this real, you can tell that it's hard sometimes because they're people and they're selfish and they want their own,
Sure.
opinion and they disagree. But there is this real, cultivation of that, especially like for both my parents. I think of my dad especially, but how he'll even just as we're working through stuff as a family or just character traits he sees in me, he's like look, I can't do that to your mom because that would just be awful for a family. I have to give myself and what I want for her interests because it will be better. My mom will say the same thing, and so that selflessness is beautiful. And I do think that for them, it doesn't come from themselves, that selflessness. There's a lot of times that they choose it actively, but I also know that they're very aware of how they need Christ's help in that, and that it's a constantly saying that no, I will fail at this if I'm doing it by my own efforts, but because of Christ, it's not about me. So that love is a supernatural love that I see, but it's grounded in very gritty details of ordinary
Right,
life.
right.
Yeah,
I think a recurring theme that's happening here, or at least what I'm kind of interpreting, is that there is that selflessness, but there's also that ability to know that these are two individuals
mm-hmm.
that are inside this relationship. Like, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about this when we talk about singleness, but
Right,
at least my parents recognize that they don't need to be together every single minute of the day.
right. No,
Right?
yeah,
Like my dad goes on hunting trips every so often and he's gone for like a week. And then my mom does her own um, things about the house or out in the garden, and she has her own like passion projects that she has. And so they don't have to be together every single point. And I think that's important to me as well as being, again, a supreme introvert. I know that I cannot have someone with me the entire
yeah,
day or else I
no,
would go insane.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I need to have that hour, maybe two, to be
yeah,
like, I need to be by myself for a
yeah,
bit, just in quiet
yeah,
almost.
yeah, yeah, totally. And that's yeah, it's ordinary life, but also at the same time, like, yeah, there's the awareness of the person's personality and how to best accommodate that personality. But then there's also a sense of, when my mom was raising kids, she couldn't get away.
Right. Yeah.
But she was okay with that. Like she let that slide in a way because yeah. So that's why I say there's a supernatural kind of
Sure.
feel to it. And I think what marriage does is it reveals your self bent. It reveals your desire for self, because when you're around someone so intimately for so much of life, you know the person's faults and you know your own faults much better.
Mhm.
And that's, you need repentance, you need grace.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, as much as I value marriage, I
Uh-huh.
do want to bring up the fact that I also realize, understand, and advocate that marriage is not the best option for every single person out there. I think that there are those individuals who just marriage is not for them, whether it's like, I just like being single and I
Sure.
just don't want to commit to someone.
Yeah.
The celibate people that are out there
Yeah.
who's, again, sex doesn't really matter to them. Or asexuals are kind of the same way. It's like
Or
sex
they
doesn't
just,
drive them.
I
Or
mean, I think that's where, yeah, celibate can mean two different things. It means someone
Sure.
doesn't care about sex, but then it'd be someone like
Like
Barry
Wesley.
or Wesley,
Yeah.
who, yeah, they like sex is a desire, but they are not married, and so they know it's not the confine for it. So I think there's two
Right.
different definitions of celibate. There's your definition, and then there's the Christian
No,
definition.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. No, that's fair.
Yeah.
Either way, there's people that have made that choice or decision. It's like, I don't want to get married. I don't want to be married, or whatever intermediary there is between those two. There's also those relationships for the polyamorous group out there that they have multiple. They have multiple partners inside their life. Now, I don't know if this is really the podcast to get into a debate about that lifestyle and stuff, but I'm just saying that marriage is not
And
a
so
traditional marriage is not the right solution for every single person.
and that's your belief is that it's not. So it's I guess like that's so it's more of a preference.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's an option. You can get married and have love that way, and
Right.
wouldn't that be nice? Or you can
Marriage
stick
is
around.
like the croutons of life. Some people like them, some people don't. So you don't have to have them on there.
Right. I mean, obviously,
Or a better analogy, they're like the pineapples on pizza.
Wow. We might have to.
Some people love them, some people hate them.
I don't like pineapple on pizza.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Oh, really?
My favorite.
So I guess that's where I think that's obviously that's a difference between how we believe.
Yeah.
Because it's something that I would say that not that marriage is for everybody, because I think that there's a great, but sex can only happen within marriage.
Right.
And I mean, one of the questions I have for you then is, why bother with commitment? I mean, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but if one can just have sex with whoever, and whenever.
Well, I mean, I think that is why marriage is such an important trait. Because you're right, when you're a single person, and depending on the type of dater you are, you might be having multiple dates with multiple people kind of at the same time. Maybe not on the same day, but I'm just saying, like, you could be
You're dating multiple people.
You could be dating multiple people over like the span of a few weeks. But with marriage, you're saying no, like that is over. Like I am now saying, like, you are the only person in my life. Now, there's going to be the people who like cheat on their spouses and like run around after them, or there's open marriages and stuff that are there where both partners understand that like that's kind of the deal that's going on. I still think marriage is important because you're making that declaration of saying that you're the only one for me. Could you still go and have sex with other people? Sure, but I think that is debasing and not really honoring your partner that you have then in that case. I guess so for me, I think that's somewhat of a moot point. It's like, yes, I could do that, but I can also go murder people tomorrow if I wanted to. I don't do it.
I guess I'm just wondering why there doesn't seem to be a consistency with that, like the sense where as soon as I make that commitment, I can't sleep around with anybody else, but I sure could before. And how does that, if that's kind of your understanding, like, well, I could sleep around before with anybody I wanted to, whereas now that I'm married, I'm not. Versus a sense of no, the sex is something just for marriage, and there's not that that's going to change desire, but there's a consistency to it.
It certainly changes things, but I could fire back on kind of in a similar vein that if your choice, or not choice, but if your belief is that sex is only for marriage, right, that people sometimes jump into marriage just so that they can have sex.
Totally. And I guess that's what I'm saying.
I think that's a bit damaging too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, marriage and sex doesn't fulfill you.
Right.
And that's something that I think is really important, because I think it's easy to go into a marriage and say, like, I need this in order to be a fulfilled person. And then what's the point of that? Like, that's not going to fulfill you, because eventually you'll realize that you'll run out of that too. And so that's where, there's this real sense of it's sex itself and marriage are both wonderful things, but they are not what make you human. They're not what make you a fulfilled person.
I agree with that. I think I've really started to really understand that over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Which is, sex is great, but it is not what is going to help you feel complete. Where it is that actual commitment and that kind of symbiosis of two people coming together, that's what the important part is. The physicality is a way to, I guess, honor that or to celebrate that, but they're almost two separate things. There's the marriage piece or the dating piece, and there's the sex piece that is intertwined but separate. Right.
One of the things that I think that a commitment allows you to do is it says that it's if you have a commitment and you're promising to love someone despite what comes, then that almost frees you to not worry when infatuation fades. There's something else to propel you. Okay, I've committed to this person. I've committed this. I'm no longer in love with them. I don't like them anymore, actually, because I'm living around them, and like, this sucks because we're both selfish people. But we said yes in front of God and in front of all these other people. Yeah. And so I'm going to push through. And then it's like, and it's kind of frees you, because in that sense, I think there's almost a sense of deep rest that comes from that, because you're no longer trying to impress the person. You're no longer trying to keep the person loving you. You know they're going to love you, and there's a promise that's been made, and so now you can work through things find ways to cultivate love, yes, but it's no longer about it's no longer about you having to earn that person's love.
Right. Yeah, I think what we're glossing over here too is that there are always going to be those relationships that shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Right.
Like there are people that just should not have gotten married in the first place. And how we kind of view divorce or the dissolution of a union together.
Yeah.
At least from my point of view, as much as I hate hearing about divorce, and I can have two kind of opposite opinions in my head at the same time, which is I think people jump sometimes to divorce quicker than they probably should, where it seems like we're having a bit of a disagreement, we should divorce each other.
We're no longer in love.
So let's just divorce.
Yeah.
And that might be putting the cart before the horse a little bit, where they're jumping to that solution. However, I hold that idea with the idea that divorce in many ways is sometimes a good idea to do. So it's like sometimes people jump to it too quickly, but also, yes, we should be able to divorce one another because there's sometimes where that union needs to end.
Yeah, and that's where it's something that it's one of those harder things to wrestle through because I would look at it from okay, so I think divorce is definitely an option, and the Bible leaves grounds for divorce, sexual infidelity, abuse. There's a number of categories, but it's something that is treated with way more seriousness. Like it's the exception rather than an option, I guess is how I'd put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, an exception. Like in worst case scenarios, given these criteria, it's something that could exist, but find everything that would work to avoid that. And I'm thinking of your parents' example, because you were talking about how that 40-year love is something that's beautiful and worth celebrating. You also said there were times where maybe they should have got a divorce. Right, and so you can't have, well, not that you can't have one without the other, but if they had that divorce, then that beauty of committed love that had matured together wouldn't be there.
I agree.
And so I guess like that's where I think there's this effort where once you fall out of love with someone, which happens in a relationship, you will fall out of love with someone. You will not always be in love with the same person. Yeah. It's going to require work. It's going to require commitment. Is that, or when things get difficult, like is that when you leave mutually and just say it's not going to be an option, like we're done with this? Or is there a sense where because you're married, you work through that and that leads to a deeper, or it means that you have to work out issues that wouldn't have been worked out otherwise, your own problems that would have been worked out otherwise. It's a complex thing.
Yeah,
and
this is above my pay grade.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think trying to work it out as much as possible. Again, there are those deal breakers that would be like, the time is to split up.
Yeah.
But I think that trying to look at all of the different options that are out there, counseling, communication, all the other stuff that's out there. I pulled this up right before we started recording. This is from a CBC article that's referencing Stats Canada. This is from 2006, so I don't know how much it's actually. Yeah. The stats are from 2006, but because our censuses take way too long to tabulate. Two lists here. Number one. Here's the top 8 reasons why people marry, according to the Canadian Census.
Interesting. Let's hear this.
Which is feeling that marriage signifies a commitment.
Right.
Bunch of losers over here. No, moral values, belief that children should have married parents.
Interesting.
It is the natural thing to do.
We just fell into a hole together and all of a sudden we were married. It just happened.
It's the only thing to do. I'm sorry. We're floating down the river. Marriage, I guess. Financial security.
This ring just showed up on my finger. I don't know.
That's right. We're going to Mount Doom. I guess we're married now. I don't know. Financial security, religious beliefs, pressure from family, pressure from friends.
Interesting.
Which worst option of marrying those last two. Top 5 reasons for divorce, different.
Felt natural? Was that one of them?
It felt unnatural.
That's so interesting.
No,
okay, it's not.
That's fine. Different values and interests.
Okay, so you realize that
they love curling. I don't, and it's just we cannot make this work.
Yeah, guys, we're Canadian. That's important.
Yeah. Abuse, physical or emotional, which makes sense. Yeah. Alcohol and drugs.
Also.
Infidelity. Career-related conflict, which I don't know what that means.
What was is that list done? Is that?
That's yeah.
What was the first one again?
Different values and interests.
Yeah.
So I can understand the values part of that one. Interests, I'd have to have more clarification of what that actually means.
You can make curling work. Guys.
I'm just interested in killing hobos. That's just my interest, man.
I guess that's I don't know these stats and why the people behind them. That first reason kind of feels like that kind of falling out of interest of each other or love of each other. It's just like, okay, we're no longer the same. let's just get over with it. And I think that's where the commitment kind of stands against that, because we will change. I think that's something that I'm very aware of, is and something that some of the best advice that I've seen on marriage is, it's called loving the stranger. Like,
Yeah.
the person you are marrying, you do not know. In fact, you don't know yourself. You're going to change so much in the next 5 years, let alone 40.
Sure.
And so, like, be prepared for that you don't know this person you're marrying, because people are so complex. People will change. And
for me, though, that kind of excites me. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a weirdo in this. Is like, I don't want ever to stay the same 100%. I want to be learning new things. I want to be getting new skills. I want to be grabbing new interests. So for a partner that I want to commit my life to, I'd hope that the same held true for them.
I guess, no, I agree with that. I guess it's deeper than that. It's like, you are going to have times, I'm just really aware of this, that if I marry Annie, there will be times where I'm going to really doubt that decision.
Yeah.
I'm like, who is this person? And she's going to say the same about me, because there's often I say that about myself now as a single person. Like, who is this person that I've turned into? And based on the person that I had known 5 years ago, I have changed a lot. And so that's where the commitment, saying that, no, I'm going to change, and I'm going to have to learn to love this person.
Yeah.
And that I need help doing that. I can't do it alone.
This is like me every single day when I go to Starbucks, and I'm like, I want the muffin or the Danish? I'm going to go with that muffin. And as soon as I got the Danish, I knew it.
I don't like Starbucks. It's terrible coffee. So,
well,
just want to make that disclaimer.
Mr. Snobby Pants over here has
Mr. Care about quality over here.
I just want to do one last statistic from this article, which I thought was interesting too, and maybe speaking more to the culture at large, which is that for the first time in Canadian history, there are more unmarried people than legally married people.
Yeah. Does that mean people that are cohabitate? Is that the word too?
Could be. Yeah. It just means that on the census they are marking single on their ballot. So they could still be cohabitating with someone. They're just not legally married.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where I feel like both Christian culture and then even just conservative moral culture doesn't account for that. And I think that's why we're going to be talking about singleness coming up in one of the next episodes. But that's where it's really important to have I think for Christians, it's really important to recognize that the Bible values marriage and treats it as really important, and as a picture of, like, we call the consummation of the new heaven and the new earth the marriage supper of the Lamb, meaning that it's finally Christ and God is brought together with his people, his children are finally brought together at last. Like, there's something beautiful, there's something supernatural about this imagery that represents the core of reality. And so it's really important. And yet that kind of marriage, that marriage supper of the Lamb that exists in heaven, is not just for married people, that it's for Christians. And so all Christians can partake of that. So there's something that I think that's been really, not that takes away a lot of the hurt and the pain and the frustration of not having someone in your life forever, which is beautiful and you want, but it just is really important to have a theology of that, understanding of that in our culture.
This maybe segues really nicely. I put this as Kyle's big question in the notes that I have here on my computer.
Saw that. Yeah, I'm terrified of it.
But there is so if there's no marriage in heaven, then why do we care about it on earth at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to, and I saw it on your notes. I'm trying to think through.
You can't cheat. You look at your own work.
As we type them together.
That's right.
But yeah, so then thinking through, like, how do you answer that? And one thing that I read an article, which I'll link to in the show notes, a couple weeks ago, that was talking about this very question of, so Jesus says that marriage, there's no giving of marriage in heaven. So what does that mean for earthly marriages? And part of what this article is saying is that marriage and the reality of it is to bring two people together to, the Bible uses the word sanctify, which is to make more like Christ. Like you're serving each other, you're helping each other see your own faults, and Christ is working through you and making you more like him through this hard act of marriage. And you are doing work, which is important here on earth, like you're raising family, or you're tending to a home, or you're working, like all these things that are good in and of themselves. And eventually all those physical things, like the marriage side of it, will, and the having kids, if you do have that, doing all the work together, all that, like, it fades, and what's left is a deep friendship. Right. And a deep, like, you look at I think older couples that have gone through all that work, and they're still productive. They're still working with churches and whatever, doing all these things. But the actual, all those physical things of marriage are kind of starting to fade away. And what's left is a couple that knows each other really well and that has gone through so much together. And what this article is saying is that in eternity, that still exists. That couple's no longer married, but they're still really good friends. They use that word friends as kind of as what remains. And I read that, and I thought it was really beautiful and really encouraging, even for me pursuing a relationship, because it says that what I love about this person, that deep commonality and that deep sense of understanding, is what's going to be deepest. And in an eternity, that will still exist. And so I guess to answer your question in another way is saying that marriage is something that is temporary but good, and it's there to unite people to Christ in a very deep way, and to do work together, whether that's spiritual work, like or just day-to-day work in a way that's very special and very important, and that the good of that will exist in eternity. Does that make any sense?
That makes sense.
I'm going to listen to this and go, maybe no sense, I'm sure. I'm
It
going to re-listen to this and just be mad the whole time and just give up
That's
podcasting.
right. So send in your letters, assumptionspod@gmail.com. I guess to wrap this conversation up, there's just a couple last questions I have, which is this is really nothing to do with marriage, but this had my mind firing here a little bit.
Good.
What is, when you say eternity, what does it actually mean? Like, I guess I'm trying to get you to define heaven.
Yeah.
I know that the popular conception is like it's a bunch of people on clouds with halos above their heads.
It's not.
But is that just is it just Earth over again? Is
Right,
it like
yeah.
Earth 2, better Earth?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. And I'll link in the show notes to a video I think that does a good job explaining this.
Someone brought a documentary crew. They actually went to heaven.
It's just really great take on it. Really like it. But the Bible uses the phrase the new heaven and new earth.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a sense that this earth is a very real thing. And there's a lot of good in it. It's created by God, but there's a lot of evil because of sin and because of human selfishness. And that the new heaven and the new earth is the reality of God being brought down to earth, and the two joined together.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is sinful, what is wrong in the world will be removed and done away with, and have justice brought to it. But then what is good about here on earth will continue into heaven. And so heaven, in a sense, then, it's kind of, I mean, the Euros were do-over, but it's a sense of all the good about earth being united to God at last. And then all the good that is God existing in a reality that doesn't include suffering, and that doesn't include sin.
I guess what I'm really asking is, do they have HBO? I guess is there sex in heaven? Is that a thing or no?
There's a lot of debate on that.
Right.
It's above my pay grade.
Yeah, got it. So I think that kind of answers this question, which was ultimately, why is marriage the focus of so much in society?
Yeah.
And I think that you've kind of answered that
How?
from your end, in that, at least from the Christian worldview, this is that way to bring the spirits together in kind of a human way, but to honor each other and to hopefully make that go forth and multiply statement, not just a biological thing, but a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's still that kind of foundation of society. This is how we make those commitments. This is how we build up great families. This is how we support kids.
It's glue.
It's the glue that holds the fabric together.
Okay.
I am not that type of liberal that thinks that we need to rip every family apart and live in some like hedonistic landscape. That's not my point of view. I do still think the family is super important in our society, and we should honor that family as much as we possibly can. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, it has.
It's, I think, been our longest conversation. Looking at the clock here, at least. Daniel, if people wanted to get in contact with us, there's a bunch of different ways they can do that. We're still looking for people, as you've been listening to this season. If you have comments, concerns, just a way that you want to contribute to this show, please do that. You can send out like an audio clip of yourself or a text message to assumptionspod@gmail.com. We'll be doing something in our concluding episode where we kind of listen to some of those and comment back to you. So please send those in. They'll be really, really great. Also, we haven't mentioned this in a while, but if you want to help support our little small podcast grow, you can go onto iTunes and to Apple
Apple Podcasts.
Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast from, and leave us a review and a rating, which would be really, really great. But Daniel, if people wanted to get in contact with you on the internet somehow, how could they do so?
One thing I'll say just before then, too, is when we've been listening to these conversations over again before we release them and groan inside our inconsistencies and lack of communication. But one thing that we are going to do is go cover some of the ground that we missed in our wrap-up episode. So do pay attention to that. Especially if you're listening to this once everything's done, say, in a couple months or a year. Include that wrap-up episode in part of your understanding of what we're talking about, because there's a lot that I think we'll include then. To answer your question, where to find me, my website, danielmelvillejones.com.
Cool. Assumptions Pod is all of the social media. We're starting to post a little bit more on Instagram, but we're on Twitter and elsewhere on Facebook. My own personal Twitter is probably the best way to get in contact with me. I'm at the Kyle Marshall. That's Marshall with 2 L's. And next time, here in a couple weeks, we're going to be talking a little bit more about singleness.
Yeah.
And what our thoughts are on that.
Yeah.
So hopefully you'll join us for that conversation.
Yeah.
Until then,
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Assumptions is produced by Kyle Marshall and Daniel Melville Jones. This episode edited by Kyle Marshall. Our thumbnail was created by the always great Chris Taniguchi. All of the music in this episode is from the band The Parson Redheads. You can check out their music anywhere digital music is available. If you want a full rundown of the articles and media that we referenced, check out the show notes that Daniel puts together that are attached to this episode. It's always a really great document he puts together. Thanks for listening to The Credits. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.